Chapter 3, Chapter 1, Wonderland 2. Wonderland had been home to the outlaws and the insane, however, it still had rules. First, don't piss off anyone stronger than you. Second, you couldn't commit any crimes in the neutral zone. Third, the trash from the slums would be left to rot in their own territory. However, like the rules of any world, there were always exceptions. The caucus race. It was a race to kill or be killed in the streets of the slums. The winner among the tens of participants who took part in the competition would become the slum's leader. Hart, looking down at the street, was sitting on top of the roof with his feet dangerously dangling. He had been nervously watching the roads in anticipation of his favorite event, the caucus race. A shadow hidden in the darkness fidgeted like a bug. Hart smiled widely with his long red lips. Growling, Hart said, "I'm looking forward to this." Hart's senses became aroused as his pheromone-filled voice wafted through the air. The prostitutes he had called to enjoy during his climax were cheering and squirming. Just then, from the rooftop, someone could be seen through the door. His face was sickly pale.
His lips moved beneath his black mask.
"When do we start?" "Casually," Hart retorted. "You acted like you weren't interested. I'm surprised you came out, White Rabbit." While walking toward Hart, White Rabbit snorted and replied, "When?" Upon seeing the enormous rectangular sword slung diagonally across White Rabbit's back, Hart's minions stopped him. White Rabbit shrugged and said, "Can you calm your minions down? I'm a neutral party." "Is the rabbit barking?" Hart asked haughtily. "Such a way with words," White Rabbit said, rolling his eyes. White Rabbit raised his elbows, mumbling. As he buried his face into his arms, White's hair fell onto the handrails. His childlike behavior suited him. He was small, thin, and young-looking. "So, when are we starting?" asked White Rabbit again. "Soon." Hart said while locking his gaze on a single point. Someone was walking toward them. Someone who was wearing a black suit and had white hair. Hart nudged White Rabbit's arm with his shoe. White Rabbit angrily lifted his head. "Shh, teeth." "What?" White Rabbit asked in annoyance. "You'll regret it if you don't see this," said Hart. Still annoyed, White Rabbit asked, "What could it possibly be?" "Huh?" White Rabbit squinted in the direction of where Hart's shoe was pointing. White Rabbit saw white blonde hair and a black suit. Attached was a colossal sword, unsuitable for someone with such a small and thin stature. The frame was a bit different, but a person who was remarkably similar to White Rabbit was standing there. With a neatly pressed suit and a walk full of hope, White Rabbit could sense that this was an outsider of Wonderland. Progressively losing his composure, White Rabbit asked, "Since when did we have something like that?" "Have you seen that person before? Stop acting like a bunny. Are you afraid of losing your identity?" Hart asked. Now, angry, White Rabbit yelled, "Have you seen that person before?" "I haven't," Hart replied calmly. There was nothing that happened in Wonderland without Hart being the first to know about it. If Hart hadn't seen the person before, then there was a 100% chance that the person was a newcomer. White Rabbit growled under his mask and said, "I'm killing that." "Let's put our fate in the rest of the race," said Soyun. Hart laughed out loud, stuck his arms out, and bowed mockingly at the reaction towards the newcomer. White Rabbit, however, yelled, "Get off me!" in response. Hart turned his head and spoke to the newcomer. "Hey, Blondie." 1. Wonderland, Parts 5-8. Mere feet away from the edge of the Wonderland billboard, Soyun stopped and looked up at it. The sign reminded her of an amusement park with such an impactful presence. Just a few more steps until entering Wonderland. Soyun moved slowly toward it. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, and on the 4th step, she breathed the Wonderland air in deeply. Ah, I am now free. Overjoyed, she didn't recognize the gloomy atmosphere of the place. Thinking that she should find an empty house, she shuffled forward. Hey, Blondie. At the research facility, Soyun was called by various nicknames other than her name, such as Hey, You, or Number 137. Blondie was another nickname she'd heard before. She looked up to where she sensed people watching her. Atop a 3-story building, a man stood on the roof, red hair muddled by the darkness, and a handsome face. He wore an indigo suit with a deep red handkerchief and an open collared shirt, uninhibited by a necktie. With such limited information, Soyun was unable to decipher this man's identity. Yeah, you. Newbie, the man said, sliding his hand through his tousled hair. Even from this small action, she could feel his overflowing energy and innate aura of violence. This action is how she was able to decipher his identity. Heart, Wonderland's strongest fighter, and the man who would end up falling in love with Alice. In Wonderland, Heart was described as being in his mid-20s, but the man in front of her looked a bit younger than that. As expected, this current time period was before the story began. Soyun felt a bit relieved. Next to him was another character from the novel, White Rabbit. Soyun could feel White Rabbit's resentment toward her. Tonight is the caucus race. We were preparing a sideshow to prelude its start. White Rabbit, here, has chosen you as his target. Lucky for you, newbie. Caucus race. The term may have been mentioned in Wonderland's inspiration, Alice in Wonderland, but in the actual novel Wonderland, such a term never came up. As if reading her mind, Heart explained, the playing field is this smelly street and the buildings surrounding it. You will diligently scurry around like a rat trying to hide. And in under an hour, kill this guy. If you succeed, I will let you compete in the actual race. Truthfully, even as Heart said this, he did not have a trace of expectation on Soyun succeeding. There were many who entered Wonderland to escape the law, but the majority of them couldn't last a month without losing their lives. Soyun looked so frail that he doubted she could lift anything heavier than a spoon. Thus, she wouldn't be able to last a day here. Yes, he was certain of it. Heart laughed at himself from 10 minutes prior, thinking he must have been blind. It was a moonless night. The few stars that lit the sky twinkled as 2 swords clashed against each other. Black clothes melted into the darkness, and all that could be seen were the 2 white, floating heads and the silver from the swords. Then the scent of blood. You'll regret it if you don't see this, said Heart. Still annoyed, White Rabbit asked, what could it possibly be? Ha! White Rabbit squinted in the direction of where Heart's shoe was pointing. White Rabbit saw white blonde hair and a black suit. Attached was a colossal sword, unsuitable for someone with such a small and thin stature. The frame was a bit different, but a person who was remarkably similar to White Rabbit was standing there, with a neatly pressed suit and a walk full of hope. White Rabbit could sense that this was an outsider of Wonderland. Progressively losing his composure, White Rabbit asked, "Since when did we have something like that? Have you seen that person before? Stop acting like a bunny. Are you afraid of losing your identity?" Heart asked. Now angry, White Rabbit yelled, "Have you seen that person before?" "I haven't," Hart replied calmly. White Rabbit fell at Soyun's feet. With the two knives, she stabbed both his hands into the ground, trapping him. White Rabbit, like a true Wonderland resident, tried to move even as he screamed in pain, but the knives would not budge. No way. Hey, who the heck are you? Answer me, B-Teach. Hey, cock. Stop right there. Feeling threatened, White Rabbit cussed. His mask fell away, and the face underneath was childlike. Soyun ignored him and moved. He was unable to get away, yet he kept flailing about, so she walked over toward his legs. Hey, ack! In 2 swift strokes, White Rabbit lost both his legs. His body spasmed in a pool of blood. Soyun looked up at Hart. As Hart's eyes locked with hers, he leaned his body forward. The face that appeared suddenly out of the blue was covered in shadow, but Soyun thought she knew what his expression was like. Why? Do you not have the guts to finish him off? At Hart's words, White Rabbit, who was splayed out and missing his legs, looked up hopefully. Soyun stepped onto White Rabbit's back. Beneath her heels, White Rabbit flinched. Soyun put strength into her heels and broke his ribs. No. Even as the streets echoed with agonizing screams, Hart did not miss Soyun's answer. Her voice was a calm alto that melted into the night air. Hart smacked his lips. I want to hear more of that voice. He threw out a question he had no interest in hearing the answer to. Then why won't you kill him? At Hart's words, White Rabbit shouted indecencies. Through blue lips frothing with spit and blood, he sputtered out a noise. It wasn't a loud noise, but it still annoyed him because Soyun's lips moved also. You, Hart, listened more intently. Look like the type of person who would like to decapitate him. With Hart's maniacal laughter as the soundtrack, his sword sliced through the night air. Blood flooded the streets, and a white-haired head rolled across the ground. Correct? Hart exclaimed. Soyun walked into the alley with ease. Bravo. That was a phenomenal prelude. Did everyone see that? Okay, then shall we start the real race? All participants. Hart suddenly realized that in the 10 minutes that he had been talking excitedly, the rest of the participants had scuttled into the darkness, out of sight. He had poured so much of his attention into the prelude that he didn't realize the participants had run away. Well, after seeing such an intense prelude, it was no surprise that they had all gotten scared and fled. All the participants ran away, so I guess the winner of the caucus race is you, Blondie. So, how do you feel? Soyun lifted the sword that White Rabbit had used. It looked like a Chinese chef's knife and was so huge that when she held it up, it was able to cover her entire body. She placed the sword in its sheath and slung it over her back. I want to replace White Rabbit. White Rabbit. This was the name of the white-haired, red-eyed, sickly pale-skinned character. Nickname, Undertaker. Gender, male. Age, unknown. He was supposed to relay clues about Alice's parents' death, but sometimes confused her with lies for his own amusement. If Soyun were to replace him, she would be able to move the story along better than the White Rabbit in the original story. She could save Alice from the trouble she faced due to his lies and make the story unravel to its end more quickly. That was her motive. Hart laughed heartily, clutching his sides, and granted her request without hesitation.